Happy Wednesday evening to you folks at home and watching and listening all over the world. Thanks for tuning in for another Bayou Blitz podcast. This one, Irons and Boylan, joined by my friend, founder of the podcast. I can go on a whole list of nice things to say about, but that would take the whole show. Bob, I expect that money you promised me for saying that, everybody. But nonetheless, thank you to get to the Bayou Blitz this week. I know that it's kind of a weird feeling week to join, especially after what happened on Monday. And for you guys that joined at halftime, Bob and I were fairly impressed with what the Saints were able to do in those last 3 minutes. Really dominated the Tampa Bay offense for the entire game, and it looked like the Saints done enough to win. And the media is going to paint it that Tom Brady led this miraculous comeback, but in all actuality, the Saints shot themselves in the foot on multiple occasions. We will talk about some happy stuff too. And Bob, I was telling you before we went live, if the Saints would have won the game on Monday, I feel like we would have maybe 15 minutes of this and then 45 minutes worth of talk about the 2011 season that we promised everybody. But because of the way this game ended, we got to talk about it. But before we get into all that, Bob, good to see your face. I see you're boycotting the Saints logo or something going on behind you. What's going on with that, and how are you and Lord and Lids doing?
Yeah, happy Wednesday to you, Brendan. Happy Wednesday to all of our Bayou Blitz family. Thank you for joining us on another Wednesday. Part of it is boycotting the Saints logo. I have the retro stuff up. The Jim Everett, the Drew Brees picture. A couple of the autograph cards that I have. The logo. The logo is covered up this week. It's also in part to 3 separate waves of rage that I had in the fourth quarter on Monday night. Some of this stuff behind me is broken, and I don't know to what extent or to what level of damage yet. Over the last 2 days, I haven't brought myself to raise the towels and look. But next week, whatever is remaining will be back on display, I'm sure.
How about that? Well, let's talk about what happened on Monday night. You came into the game saying one of the actors was going to be Shaheed, who ended up having a fabulous game for New Orleans and had some really nice moments as a receiver. You pointed out, at least on film and what you saw when you were in the press box at Pittsburgh, is you noticed he's really improved as a route runner. And we saw it on full display Monday night. I thought Andy Dalton had perhaps looking at the tape, his best passing performance as a member of the New Orleans in terms of accuracy, in terms of coming up and stepping into throws and big moments. Even one that ended up incomplete to Taysom Hill, I thought was just an absolute dime from Andy Dalton. I thought he had a really good outing. Unfortunately, the Saints weren't able to hold on. This did apply pressure to Tom Brady. Didn't get to a whole lot. And there were some moments where the youthful secondary reared its ugly head. Bob, before we get to negatives, what are some positives you saw from New Orleans on Monday night?
Well, you mentioned Shaheed. And, I think as we come away from that game, now that the Saints season is over, and yes, folks, it is, there is still an extremely slim mathematical possibility that they could win the NFC South, their only way into the playoffs. But that mathematical possibility is lumped in with Moses parting of the Red Seas or whatever other biblical miracles you might believe in. Because the Saints season is over, I think Shaheed is one of the players that we need to see a lot more from over these last few games, just to see where he fits in the Saints' immediate future. Beyond that, I agree with you. I thought Andy Dalton played one heck of a football game. In the fourth quarter, just like against San Francisco, there were a couple plays that I know Andy would love to have back. A couple sacks or pressures where he double clutched or maybe held onto the ball too long. But that's nitpicking, because New Orleans did not lose because of Andy Dalton. As a matter of fact, the Red Rifle put them in position to win this game, a game that they should have won. Outside of that, you can't say too much positive about the offense. And since we're not going to talk about the negatives quite yet, I'll jump over to the defensive side. We both agreed that the key to the game, the number one major key to the game going in, was the Saints defensive line pressuring, harassing, battering Tom Brady, and shutting down the run game. Tampa got more rushing yards than what I expected them to, but for the most part, that aspect was bottled up. And as you alluded to, they only sacked Brady once, maybe twice, but they did hurry him. They did frustrate him. They did have him off of his game, for 3.5 quarters. So mission accomplished there. Demario Davis, Caden Ellis. I mean, what other superlatives can you throw on these guys? Both of them had another magnificent outing. And I thought the secondary, for the most part, played a good 3 quarters of football. Alontae Taylor in particular stood out to me. But Tyrann Mathieu, Paulson Adebo, Marcus May, they all had some nice moments in the ball game as well. But and again, I don't want to get into the negatives quite yet, but defensively, it was a unit that for 56 minutes was the unit that we expected to see from the New Orleans Saints from the onset of the season.
I think that's absolutely fair. One of my favorite tweets from this week from some member of the national media, I don't remember off the top of my head, but they said, "Do you remember when the Saints reached for Alontae Taylor in the draft?" And I mean, at the time, a lot of us said that, "Oh, that was a reach." You and I probably would agree, or if you go back and watch the tape, I'm sure that we did say it was a reach. All of a sudden, I mean, this guy's looking like one of the steals, one of the diamonds in the rough of the drafts. And the Saints scout department once again proving that they're some of the best in football. And they have draft picks, and that might be a little negative. Is a segment into our negatives from the game. I mean, I think the first and obvious thing is shooting yourself in the foot, and we'll start with the two big ones. And one other side of the football. The first being the pass interference on Paulson Adebo that just gifted Tampa Bay points. That's going to be the first one. We don't really have to go into detail there. It was blatant. It was obvious. He got beat. And was trying to prevent the touchdown. Happened to everybody in the league, but what a terrible time for it to happen.
Yeah.
And Paulson, who had a great rookie season, having a rough sophomore campaign, a sophomore slump, it hasn't been great for Paulson. He had moments where you've seen that rookie, Paulson Adebo, and he's had moments where he looks like a rookie, if you will, opposed to showing off that rookie tape. Now, offensively, let's talk about this, Bob. The moment that everyone is talking, and that is Mark Ingram stepping out of bounds, a yard on second down, setting the Saints up for 3rd and 1. Obviously, they weren't able to convert. They punt the ball, and Tampa goes and scores it. Now, we had news today regarding Ingram with the MCL sprain now becoming an MCL partial tear. That'll put him out for the remainder of the season. Now, let's recall the game. Ingram leaves with injury, trots back out, and play where he catches the ball in the flats, turns upfield, and steps out of bounds a yard short of the sticks. What does he do right after? He gets down to one knee, showing pain in that knee, and does not return the ball game. So Ingram did address it on Twitter, and he said he had to be better. He takes ownership for that. I'll let his advocate and say, you know what, Mark? You probably shouldn't have been in the football game when there was already damage to the MCL of the knee that you're complaining to the training staff about. They throw you back out there, and I get it. Mark, best pass block running back on the team, very versatile. Mara wasn't having a good game. You mean to tell me a situation where you're in Bucs territory. You got to have a couple first downs to win the game that you don't want Alvin Kamara in the game. Even if he's having a bad game, even if he's having a poor season to his standards, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But nonetheless, Ingram's already injured, got thrown back into the ball game, re-injured it, stepped in bounds. Bob, where were you in that moment, and what's your thought on that play?
That was another one of my rage plays. And yeah, at first I was livid at Mark. Because as a veteran, he knows better. And let's look at that play on the surface as that. My problem with the Saints all year, a lot of the mistakes, a lot of the mind-numbing mistakes that these players are making, it's not coming from the inexperienced rookies, Alontae Taylor or Chris Olave, Trevor Penning, although he did make an egregious one on Monday night. It's coming from the established veteran players. Kamara, Ryan Ramczyk, James Hurst, how many times have they jumped, have they false started to put the Saints behind the sticks on a 3rd and short? Jarvis Landry's had a putrid season. Tyrann Mathieu has trumped that putrid season with new levels of abysmal, Jarris Bird type of abysmal. And that's the way
harsh.
What's that?
That's harsh.
It's true. When the Ingram play initially happened, that's exactly what crossed through my mind. And then we find out what we find out after the fact. And you're right. He flat out shouldn't have been in the game. It was probably his call. And Mark is a competitor. And as we know, he is a class act, stepping up and owning to what he did or what he failed to accomplish on that play. Of course, we expect nothing less from Mark at this point. But it's the lack of accountability and responsibility by the coaches. Dennis Allen, who oversees it all, supposedly. Pete Carmichael, who oversees the offense and is in charge of the offense, supposedly. They have to recognize what's going on in that down and distance situation of the game. A make or break game for your entire freaking season. And Alvin Kamara is not involved in the play call. Why? Just why? So I don't put this on Mark at all. And it's a shame. And it's not going to tarnish his New Orleans Saints legacy. But it's a shame that for a while anyway, that's going to be what people remember him for, because some people remember him for, because it's probably his last play as a New Orleans Saint, if not an NFL football player. I'm actually writing an article about that for the Saints News Network to be published tomorrow morning. For more details on that, just please read the article. But yeah, I don't put this all on Mark. Yeah, he could have made the play at the time. It's disappointing that he didn't. It's very classy that he owned up to it. But as has always been the case with the 2022 Saints, there is so much more to it than that specific player in that specific moment. And the blame has to start on the sidelines.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that, because you could point to multiple moments in the game that cost New Orleans the football game. Obviously, that's the one that a lot of people nitpick. And
and not to interrupt you, I apologize. Even Adebo's pass interference. Yeah, it was a poor decision and poor execution by him. But why in that situation is there not a too high safety coverage over the top?
Those are the $1 million questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to continue on the offensive side, because people point the finger at Mark. I was second down.
Yeah.
Even in that situation, yes, he was a yard short, but you have 3rd and 1 in Buccaneers territory, right? And the play call is a quick slant to Marquez Callaway, who I still like enough to be rostered.
Yeah.
I still like enough to be like your 4th wideout.
Yeah.
But a guy who's almost been completely eliminated from your offensive game plan week in and week out, and that guy you're going to throw a quick slant to, correct me if I'm wrong. That was an archived play from the Sean Payton, Drew Brees era, where Drew would take not even a full step from the snap and throw a quick slant to Michael Thomas to pick up first down. That's exactly what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to have Marquez Callaway. And if you want to get really technical with it, and I will, Bob, because you watch film in my more than anyone else with Saints News Network, the ball was placed on the right hash.
Mm-hmm.
So to run a slant, a quick slant to the right side of the field, when you have less room than you could ever, you're not giving Callaway a whole lot of space. You're throwing it into a really tight hole, if you will, to a guy who clearly doesn't have chemistry built with Andy Dalton.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're relying on, because if you pick up the first down, I think at that point the Bucs had one timeout left. Could be wrong.
Yeah.
If you pick up first down, you're guaranteeing at least another minute comes off the clock. And you can't guarantee it, but at that point in the ball game, up 6, you're probably attempting a field goal with Will Lutz to ice the game if you can't pick up a second first down. You mean it's you have, at that point you don't have Ingram because he's hurt, but Taysom Hill. You could quarterback sneak. You have Alvin Kamara, who's a 5-time Pro Bowl running back. This year, not so much. But you have all those weapons in your arsenal. Shoot, full back dive at one point in the game, Bob. That was his first carry of the season. You couldn't do that again. But everybody wants to go back towards the Mark Ingram play, and I go, no. Where's the creative play call? When you look at some of the analytical stats from this season of times that, according to the analytics, this should have went for it on 4th and 1. And according to the analytics, the Saints should have went for it on 4th and 1 however many times. They've gone for it 0 times. 0. And in that situation, do I understand punting the football? Sure. I do. Only up 6. Your defense has played well. I get it. But I said on Monday, I need to see if the Saints have that dog in them, if they have that heart. And I just didn't see it in the fourth quarter. And to me, some of that goes on players. Some of that goes on your leadership. Your DeMario Davises, your Cameron Jordans. Offensively, Alvin Kamara's. Right? But for the most part, when a team throughout the course of a season doesn't give you that edge, doesn't, I want to use basketball references, doesn't dive on loose balls, isn't the first one to hit the floor, if you will, that's on coaching.
Yep.
Because at that point, players don't want to win for you. I also go back to what you said earlier about coaching. And you go back and you look at an interview earlier from this season where Sean Payton was, I think it was NFL Network, and they brought Mark Ingram in. So they're interviewing Mark Ingram and Sean Payton at the same time. And Sean alludes to the fumbling problems that Kamara and Ingram had throughout the season. And Ingram's response is, I don't want to know what it would be like if it was you. Tells you everything you need to know.
Yes, sir.
About what's going on inside the New Orleans Saints locker room, which brings me to our next topic, Bob. We only have 10 minutes to discuss this topic. We might have to have a whole Bayou Blitz episode later this season. We've talked all year, is Dennis Allen on the hot seat? Should he be fired? And for the most part, you and I have said, no, he shouldn't be on the hot seat. You got to give coaches 2 or 3 years. You know, we've said the very I don't want to correct phrase here, but we've said the very usual supporting the head coach thing, if you will, believing and trusting the system, all those wonderful things, because as people that have been around the team, and you've been in the press boxes, and we've been in these Zoom calls for availability and whatnot. We're relaying everything that we've heard and been told and thought to believe. But now at this point, when you got fans calling for guys, when you have Mickey Loomis in the airport in Tampa being told by fans, it's time, it starts to raise a couple eyebrows, raise a couple questions, especially with some of the things I just said. So, Bob, in your humble opinion, is Dennis Allen on the hot seat? And if he is, does he need to go?
In my opinion, he should go. I saw enough on Monday night. And listen, I was a strong advocate of the hiring of Dennis Allen at the time. I supported him within the first 4-6 weeks when this team was struggling. I acknowledged that he was not doing a good job, but I expected that to get better. It didn't. I continued to, my support wavered through midseason, but at that point, I had then said, well, if it were me, I think I would consider a change after 1 year, but I don't think the Saints are, because they never have, and this franchise has had some awful coaching. Mike Ditka got 3 years, for Christ's sake. After Monday night, I now say, if it's me, he doesn't get out of the bye week.
Wow.
At the very least, you move on from your offensive coordinator and let Doug Marrone call plays, and let Cody Burns, the wide receiver coach, help you design the offense for the remaining 4 games. See what those two can do. Hell, how much worse could it get? So make a move on the offensive side, then fire Dennis Allen at the end of the year. I still don't know that this team will do that, but I'm positive that Carmichael won't be back. I'd bet my house on it. Dennis, I'm not so sure. Again, if it's me, I make a move. I think you have to, because this entire coaching staff is gutless. We saw it against Tampa Bay. We saw them coach afraid against the Baltimore Ravens. We saw them coach afraid against the Pittsburgh Steelers. We saw them coach afraid against offensively, coach afraid against the San Francisco 49ers. These guys got to go, because that lack of confidence trickles down through the players know. The players feel when the coaches don't have confidence in you. And when you try to get cutesy on a 3rd and 1 against a division rival that, frankly, you've dominated over the last 4 or 5 years, regardless of what their record has been, the coaches or the players realize these guys don't have any confidence in us. And that pisses them off. But that also starts to naturally eat away at their own confidence. So I'm not going to say that the players don't play for Dennis Allen, but I am saying that there is something major missing from this entire squad. And that's why I say it starts with the coaches. When I see, and I'm harsh on coaches, Brendan, I have a specific eye for it, and why. I'm not the one that's going to sit here and blame the coaches for every single thing, because, as I said earlier, and most of the way throughout the season, the coaches don't drop passes. The coaches don't fumble the ball. The coaches don't jump off sides in crucial situations. But all the other things, when your play calling is completely gutless and you have no confidence in your play, and it shows that you have no confidence in your players, that eats away at their confidence. Hence, it eats away at their performance. When you have utter failure to have any halftime adjustments whatsoever to what your opponent is or isn't doing against you, that's coaching. When you consistently have 4th quarter collapses, and this coming from a roster of players who have pulled out plenty of games in the 4th quarter over the last 4 or 5 years, that's coaching. When you pull off Chris Olave, Jarvis Landry, Rashid Shaheed in a situation and then proceed to pass the ball, that's coaching. So yes, Dennis Allen needs to go. I'm afraid they will not pull that trigger, though. I don't know. This team might have to drop 3 or 4 of their next 4 games for it to happen. And if that's the case, I'm not saying tank, but you almost have to root for it, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, and I've alluded to this all year. I've alluded to it every year, probably 2018. It's the same locker room culture is the best in football. It's what's made the team special. It's what's given the team that swagger. You know, you go back to 2017, and we'll kind of get in this when we talk about the 2011 season. A lot of people point towards 2017 as one of their favorite Saints teams. And I'm not on that train. But what made that team special, outside the fact they won games, was we had that kind of swagger in New Orleans in years, maybe ever. And the type of swagger that was coming from that draft class was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And it has trickled year in, year out over the years until this year.
Yeah.
I'll use the term pixie dust. That pixie dust, the thing that made everything magical. It looks like it's gone, you know? And now the fan base doesn't believe it's there either.
No.
To go back to that pixie dust reference, you know, what happened to Tinkerbell when people believe in fairy, right? Like, it's gone. Everything that makes it special is gone. And I don't think the Hood Nation thinks it's there anymore. And yeah, can fans be over dramatic, especially with how good the Saints have been over the years? Yes. Are people of my generation and younger spoiled in the sense that even myself, Bob, I don't really remember a whole lot of bad Saints teams even before I started covering the team professionally? Yes. But this is bad. This is all-time levels of bad. I also go back to something Alvin Kamara said earlier this year. He was coming back from injury and said that in a locker room interview with our very own John Hendricks there, said we need to find our swagger. You know, we need to get the swagger back. And you're talking about the guy in the locker room that, you know, if Lil Jon's the king of crunk, like Alvin Kamara is the king of swagger in that locker room. And even Alvin, it's not there.
Nope.
Look how frustrated. And we've talked about the quarterback thing all year. And again, he had a very good game Monday. Probably the best game I've seen him play. But you talk about a guy like Jameis Winston who has all the swagger in the world, all the confidence in the world. He is the most funny person in sports without trying to be funny. He's got a great all that stuff. Completely deflated and defeated the last time we got media availability with him. Everything that made this team special is not there. Now, you can go back and say, well, they don't have Drew. They did last year. There's still some of that swagger there.
Mm-hmm.
That team almost made the playoffs last year. Oh, Sean's not there. I think we're getting close to the root of the problem.
Yep.
And it's the excellence that Sean demands, right? It's the player buying system because of what Sean does. And again, that all goes back to the coaching staff because it's all gone. Even Taysom, who, he's had a good year. He became the first player in Super Bowl era. I'm ruining my article for later this week because why not at this point? But,
guys, we still need you to read our articles. It's how we pay bills. But yeah.
Yeah, please do. Please read it. But Taysom Hill's like the first player in the Super Bowl era to have 9 receiving touchdowns, 9 rushing touchdowns, and 9 passing touchdowns in a career. Like, that's crazy, right? You want to talk about a guy who is once a lifetime type of player. I know you're up in Pittsburgh, so you might say what else Stewart, but Taysom Hill is super special, and he's had a year. Even Taysom runs the football. Yeah, it's super predictable at this point what they're doing, but even for a guy who has all the energy in the world, shout out to my Nana who doesn't understand football, doesn't watch football, but watches Saints solely because of Taysom Hill because she's like, he always looks so happy. He's always smiling. I'm seeing less happy Taysom Hill. I'm seeing less confident Taysom Hill. That says something too. I know Taysom might not be the best example because he was Sean Payton's pride and joy.
Yeah.
But I just named Taysom, James, Alvin. Even defensively, there's guys that just don't look the same. And I think that all goes on coaching. So, yeah, I think the Saints will do it. I just don't, unfortunately. But I think it's time to let Dennis go. I really do think it's time to let Dennis go. And whoever's the next head coach is going to be – it's not an attractive job at the point either because they don't have cap space. They don't have draft capital. They don't know who their quarterback is. They have aging stars at positions. And it's not an attractive job, and this could get really, really quick. But Dennis isn't the answer to fix this team. And I think that's all I got for my little spiel on that. I do want to shout out to Anna, who's with us for the very first time tonight. Anna, thanks for hanging out. We appreciate it. Hopefully, outside of the negative stuff, we just try to keep it fun, keep it real.
Anna knows me well. I'm a little bit surprised that she hasn't been more vocal with the Bayou Blitz. But certainly love to have you back, Anna. She follows us on the Under the Dome Tuesday night podcast quite a bit. Anna is a fan of what we do, Brendan. Trust me, she is.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for making it out. Saint for Life says essentially what I just said. Because of lack of cap and capital, this division can't trade any of their stars with their dead money. It's going to be another year before we make a trade. I don't know about that back half part, but I definitely agree with the cap issue, the lack of draft capital. I understand what you're saying about trading stars. For example, Michael Thomas's contract is near impossible to trade. So you're either going to cut him or you're going to live with it. I think the Saints are more than likely going to live with it.
Yeah,
I do like and appreciate the fact that even though he's been inactive, he's been super active on Twitter in supporting the team. Gotta love Michael Thomas on social media. And on a happier note, let's transition to 2011. I think we've got a lot of negative energy out. I think the biggest questions have been answered. Do we think that Dennis should be out? Yes. Do we think it's going to happen? No. I'll throw one more at you, Bob. And this will be a quick one-word answer. No explanation. Okay? At this point in the season, do you make a change at quarterback?
No.
There you have it. No.
And look, it deserves an explanation, though. Jameis Winston has gotten a raw deal in New Orleans. There's no question in my mind. He was – I don't think the team would have been in any better position with him at quarterback because I don't think Andy Dalton – with the Arizona loss is almost solely on him. Outside of that, he has played reasonably well, at least well enough to not be at fault for all these losses. Right. So, Dennis Allen, Andy Dalton is clearly Dennis Allen's guy. There's no doubt. The actions have told us that. So because of that, you have designed one of the most putrid offenses in the league because it's so predictable. But nonetheless, you have designed the offenses around Andy Dalton to do what Andy Dalton does best. So at this point, if you're going to look at players like Rashid Shaheed, Trevor Penning, who I would come out of the bye week and start. Again, no knock against James Hurst, but you got to see what your rookie has if he's healthy, and he's healthy. I want to see what Olave can really do. I want to see what Shaheed can really do. And I want to see what Penning can really do. And to do that, I would continue to roll with Dalton at quarterback because the other players are just used to that at this point. No knock against Jameis. I just think that with the situation as it is currently, I would run Dalton. I love Jameis. I thought, night, honey, I love you. I would run. I think that Jameis deserved much better in New Orleans, and he's not going to be a Saint next year. But at this point, you're not going to make the playoffs. but you're also not auditioning Jameis to see if he's the guy. If you are, then by all means roll him back out there. But Dennis Allen is done with Jameis Winston for better, for worse. So yeah, I think you roll with Dalton.
With you, 100% with you. I'm also curious to see what the Saints do at running back, because at this point in the season, you're not going to run Alvin Kamara into the dirt. Johnson's still on the practice squad. So do you really bring a veteran like that up? Do you go try to find a younger guy? I mean, there are a lot of things that at this point in the season, it's kind of let's see what your young guys have, right?
Yeah, but the problem is they got no young guys at running back.
Exactly. So do you sign a guy off the street, or there's a lot of questions that need answering, and obviously in the bye week we'll have a little bit more on that, and we'll be able to give some more sense of direction, especially next week's episode and whatnot. But let's talk about 2011, because we've kind of teased it all year. I was very happy the first, and shoot, we've known each other for 5 or 6 years now, but I remember the first time we had that conversation. What's your favorite Saints team? You know, that whether you've covered them or not, what was your favorite Saints team to watch? And I mean, so many people go to 2009, and rightfully so. It was the first time I got to see the team in person. I went to see them in the Georgia Dome. That was their last regular season one of the season. And it was really cool, and I really liked the team. But when you and I both agreed that 2011 was the best Saints team, you know, they lost in a terrible way. And that team should have went to the Super Bowl. Drew Brees should have won MVP, and I'm getting ahead of myself. I was very happy. And we got to have an episode about it. And I started my world tour again, Bob. I had a super cool piece to show off. So I'll just tell you guys about it. 2011, obviously, Drew broke a single season passing for 46 touchdowns. Really, really incredible accomplishment. I know it's been broken since by 1 yard by Peyton Manning, but a super incredible accomplishment for Drew. I have one of Drew's game-issued jerseys from that season,
Nice.
Autographed for my Drew. Obviously, the players get a ton of jerseys throughout the year just in case they rip or need repairs. Never actually wore it, but it was assigned to him and in the locker. So that's a cool piece. I would have definitely hung it behind me, but you know, back on the world tour, Bob. Back on the world tour. We're talking about 2011. So first things first, Darren Sproles doesn't get enough love for that year. I think he still has the record for all-purpose yards in a single season. Could be wrong. Could have been broken.
I'm not sure. He might. I know he still holds the franchise record for catches by a running back in a season.
That was a good year. Ingram's rookie year kind of got lost in that shuffle with Pierre and Darren Sproles, but the Saints offense was not one that necessarily jumped off the page at you, and there was a lot of guys and returning pieces from 2009, but it also kind of sprinkled in a newer era of certain players, if you will, and that was a really nice, kind of reminds, and there's definitely some stories to the 17 season where there was returning pieces that you really enjoyed mixed in with some fresh young faces. Bob, your opening thoughts about 2011?
Did you freeze on me?
Oh, I said just your opening thoughts on 2011.
Such an amazing team, to watch. Obviously the drink was stirred by that some guy named Breeze, who, by the way, still should still hold the single season yardage record. Yes, Peyton Manning has 5,477 yards. What a lot of people don't realize is the last game of the 2013 season, the NFL went back and reviewed Peyton's final game against the Raiders that season and gave him an additional 7 yards on a lateral to Eric Decker, which, again, they credited that as a forward pass, thereby faulting him past Breeze. Go back and look at the play. It's Denver Broncos versus Oakland Raiders in the final game of that season. Peyton Manning to Eric Decker. It's a freaking lateral. And there's so many reasons that I hate Peyton Manning, but that's at the top of them. So nonetheless, Breeze had if it's not the best season overall quarterback season in NFL history, it's certainly in the top three. I mean, he broke, Marino's, at that point, it was held for 18 years, I believe, the passing yardage record. Threw for 46 touchdowns, led the league in, with 71% completion percentage, led the league in pass completions. When you count his 2 playoff games, Drew Brees threw for 6,404 yards and 53 touchdowns that year. Those are video game numbers. And everybody loves to give the love to Darren Sproles, and I get it. I mean, his 2011 year was remarkable. Sproles left a bad taste in my mouth because of fantasy football in 2012 and 2013. I was so sick of a stat line every single week, 8 catches for 12 yards. And if you're in a non-PPR league and there weren't many of them, then you got killed. But a lot of people don't realize how good Pierre Thomas still was, in 2011. Jimmy Graham really burst onto the scene that year with one of the best years a tight end has ever had. 99 catches, 1,310 yards, 11 touchdowns. But Colston went over 1,100 yards, and you still had Lance Moore, Robert Meacham, Devery Henderson. I mean, they hit you with weapons from everywhere. This team had 6 games of over 500 yards of total offense. Drew had 7 straight 300, counting the 2 playoff games, 9 straight games of over 300 yards passing. It was the best offense that I have ever seen to this day. And not just because of the passing. This team was 6th in rushing yards during the course of the year, too. You want to talk about offensive swagger. They could not be stopped by anybody.
Well, and see, here's the crazy part about that season, Bob, especially the football. And man, it was a crazy debate. I don't think a lot of people talk about it now, but the Chris Ivory to Mark Ingram debate, in which running back was kept. The Saints made the right decision in the long term.
They did, although I wanted Ivory. I won't lie.
He was aggressive. That was before it was Mark Ingram. It was still Mark Ingram. Like, Ingram didn't run as aggressively, but man, Ivory was fun. But look at these stats, Bob. Every single Saints running back that season, Ivory, Rolls, Thomas, and Ingram, each had at least 79 rushing attempts on the season. I mean, Sean Payton a lot of it for giving up on the run. This was a Michael offense, but Saints ran the football. And to your point, nobody stopped them. But, Ingram goes in. That's his rookie year. Almost 500 yards, 5 touchdowns. Pierre, 62 with 5 touchdowns. Darren Sproles, 600 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Chris Ivory had almost 400 rushing yards on that season. And then Pierre and Sproles, Pierre Thomas, 425 receiving yards. Darren Sproles, 710 receiving yards. That's insane. And Pierre Thomas will always be the greatest screen running back of all time. There's no questions. There's no and ifs or buts.
Yeah.
But that offense was so special. And you go back and, you highlighted Jimmy Graham. Marcus Colson had another borderline Pro Bowl year with almost 100 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns. Lance Moore had a pretty good year as well. Devery Henderson was, just that deep shot threat. But the nice thing about that is outside of Jimmy and Marcus, everyone else was a compliment, because even the running back, look at the running receiving yards and numbers compared to the receivers, and they were essentially receivers themselves.
Yeah, six players had at least 500 yards receiving, and then Pierre had 425 through the air after that. That's mind-boggling.
Everybody touched the football. There was so much belief in everybody. I forgot Robert Meacham as well, as a part of the receiving corps, but everybody touched the ball. Everybody. Even Jedediah Gabriel Collins had moments. And that was also one of the greatest names when they'd come out with the Sunday Night Football intros. But everyone on that team, you look at the number of records that team set offensively, special teams. John Casey at that point's like 49 years old, kicking field goals and being pretty accurate as well. And then you look at the defensive side, and so much of that defense was returners from the Super Bowl year.
Yeah.
Roman Harper. Malcolm Jenkins was a rookie when they won the Super Bowl. Jolan Dunbar, who I think you and I will safely say and agree, one of the more underrated linebackers some of those years.
Mm-hmm. And a friend of the show. We will have Jolan on. I'm sure probably a couple of times this offseason. Jolan probably had, if 2010 wasn't his best year, then 2011 was. And he such a fun player to watch. Jonathan Vilma, Jabari Greer, had a really good season. Our friend Alan Ulrich talks about, compares 2011 and 2009 a lot. The biggest difference being, the 2011 offense was much more explosive than that Super Bowl champion team. But the biggest downside, and it's nitpicking here, and it's nitpicking until you get to the playoffs. The 2011 team just didn't cause the turnovers. And especially in big moments that 2009 club did. They had 33 sacks on the year. They were 12th against the run, 13th in points allowed. All not bad numbers, but they didn't force the turnovers that Super Bowl champion team did.
They did not. And you go back and you look at the guys that led the team in sacks. At that point, you didn't have like a dominant pass rusher, right? That was Cam Jordan's rookie season.
Mm-hmm.
Junior Galette at that point was in his, I think, second year with the team, but was starting to turn a corner. I actually think, and you can double check me, I think Roman Harper led the team in sacks that year.
He did. He had 6.5.
It's crazy. But you didn't have a dominant pass rusher on that team either. But it was a super fun team. And I'll make this argument for the sake of talking about 2011. You just gave them the number, right? They were like 12th against the run. You said, 13th in points allowed?
Mm-hmm.
That's a just above average defense,
mm-hmm.
right? Middle of the pack, average. And that Saints team should have won Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Should have. Easily. Think about this, Bob. I made this argument so many years, and you probably had to. Give Drew Brees an average defense throughout his entire NFL career, and he has just as many, if not more, rings than Tom. Facts, right? Easy. If Drew had the defense he had in 2009, 11, who knows how many rings Drew Brees would have with Sean Payton. And this was just an average defense. Like I said, they had some guys that end up being Pro Bowl caliber guys on this team. Will Smith at defensive end too, kind of phasing out of his NFL career. Even he had almost 7 sacks on the year. Scott Shanley was at the end. I mean, you can nitpick the roster, okay, but there are guys that end up being part. It's Cam Jordan, Junior Galette, think what you will of him, but he was a big part of some of those teams. Malcolm Jenkins obviously ended up having a really good NFL career. Tracy Porter was about at the end of his dominance as well. Had one good year in Chicago. Check with Tracy Porter, Super Bowl hero forever. But I think the thing that stood out to me about 11, you used the word swagger. I think swag quite like a regular vocabulary word at that point, 2011. But the Saints played offensively. We talked about a coaching staff that was gutless earlier for 2022. Let's talk about not just a coaching staff, but a team in offense that feared no one at any time. And it didn't matter if there was 5 seconds on the clock or 15 minutes on the clock. That offense was going to get the ball, and they were going to dominate you. Drew Brees was going to either pick you apart surgically, they were going to run it down your throat with Ivory and Ingram, or they were going to get their playmaking running backs of Sproles and Thomas in space. Could we say there's a lot of teams, Bob, that you can go back and say they have 3 running backs? How many teams can you go back and say they had 4 really good running backs? And Drew Brees made some of, let's be honest. If if Pierre played in any other offense with either quarterback, nobody's talking about Pierre Thomas. Drew Brees definitely gave Pierre the opportunities, and Sean did too, recognizing how good he was in the screen game.
Now, see, I feel the words that you just said about Pierre, I feel the exact same way about Darren Sproles. I don't think Darren Sproles reaches anywhere near the level that he did in his career. Yeah, I know he had some success in San Diego, some success in Philadelphia, but yeah, he had the best numbers of his life with Drew Brees and Sean Payton in New Orleans.
Okay, we can agree that the receiving backs, for the most part, that team, without Drew and Sean, they're not the same NFL careers. Now, Ingram and Ivory, I mean, they had the easiest job in the world. It was literally, we're going to hand it to you, and you're going to run forward, and you're going to smack somebody, and that's that. And they did a job. I mean, Ivory ended up having a couple good years in New York. Obviously, Ingram ended up going into his role and became the Saints' all-time leading rusher, all-time leader in rushing touchdowns. He'll go down as one of, if not the best Saints running back in history until Kamara overpasses or overtakes him in some of those statistical categories. Bob gave me the little, I don't know.
I'm not sure that happened. I'm not sure Alvin Kamara is a Saint in 2023. That's another conversation for another show, though.
No, that would be getting all your assets for a full rebuild. That could be another episode. You get a full on rebuild. But I look at the other thing I look at 2011 is the offensive line for New Orleans. I talked about guys that had to kind of merge, right? There's pieces of that dominant 09 offensive line that were there, and there were some guys that had to step into like a new role and be able to mesh and merge. I mean, I look at like a guy like John Stitchcomb that retired at that point, and you go back and John Bushrod was there. Carl Nix, I think, was either a Pro Bowler or an All-Pro that year.
He was. They had 5 Pro Bowlers that year, and a couple All-Pros out of them. Breeze, Jimmy Graham, Colston got screwed again. But then 3 of their 5 offensive linemen: Bushrod at left tackle, Nix at left guard, and Jari Evans at right guard.
And Zach Strief was on the team as well. Oh man, you know who was on the team? One of my favorite New Orleans Saints ever for no reason. He didn't play. He was on injured reserve, but he had a good preseason that year. Was Joe Morgan. And I know that goes to like 2012, 2013. For no reason at all. Joe Morgan was one of my favorite Saints receivers just because of the playability. And I mean, he might have finished his career with less than 20 catches.
Yeah.
I have no idea. But it wasn't 2011. It probably was 2012. The touchdown he had against Tampa Bay will forever be one of the wackiest touchdowns I've ever seen. But he was a lot of fun too. There was just so many parts of that Saints team because, it's easy to point to 2009 and talk about the success. It's easy to point to 2010 and talk about the success they had until they went to Seattle and Marshawn Lynch became a household name. But that team wasn't like a favorite going into the season. They were going to be a good team. Right, they were a good team, but they weren't going to be like that. Breeze talked about later, talking about the 2008 season where he came up just short of Dan Marino, and saying he never thought he'd get back. Like he thought that was going to be the only opportunity, and talks about how 2011 was in that sense. Which little did Drew know that he was going to go on and throw for 5,000 yards. 5 times? This league done it 7. So, I mean, there were so many aspects of that too because Drew probably could have made the case for MVP in 2009, and maybe should have won over Peyton in 2009. But 2011, in my mind, really put Drew in a. You could say he was already in the elite class, especially after winning the Super Bowl, but 11 might have catapulted Drew to being in the conversation of he is the best quarterback in football. And the fact that he did win MVP is still an absolute joke. And we don't have a lot of time left, and you and I could talk about this team forever.
Yeah.
But with these last 5 minutes, why should have Drew won MVP over Aaron Rodgers? I want to hear the full Bob Rosa rant on that.
Because Drew had an amazing once-in-a-lifetime season, and Aaron Rodgers merely had a very good season. That, in one sentence, that's why it should have happened. And I believe to this day that if Drew Brees was in any other uniform other than the New Orleans Saints, certainly if he was in a big market, a New York, a Florida, not that Florida's a big market, but put him on a traditional power like Miami, put him out west. West Coast teams, San Francisco. Well, there were no LA teams at the time, but the big market traditional teams. Then that 2011 season would be talked about as the greatest season by a quarterback in NFL history. The way Marino's season is talked about in '84, the way Peyton freaking Manning's season is talked about in 2013, the way Mahomes' season was talked about, what was that, 2018, 2019, the way Kurt Warner's season was talked about in 1999. You still hear all those guys talked about, and rightfully so, but rarely will you hear a 2011 Drew Brees thrown in. I mean, why? I'm not going to repeat the numbers because we only have a little bit of time left, but of all the great seasons that Drew had, that was by far, bar none, hands down, the greatest. And I mean, he led a team. Jimmy Graham isn't going to be in the Hall of Fame. If he would have remained in New Orleans,
that's something I'll debate you. That's something I'll debate you.
I don't think he's a Hall of Famer, but I do think he's a slam dunk Hall of Famer if he remains in New Orleans. Marcus Colston isn't going to be in the Hall of Fame, although he should, because of the lack of recognition he received during his career. What I'm getting at is this. All those other great quarterbacks had Hall of Fame talent. And Drew, other than Jari, I think Jari Evans does get in. He's a first-year eligible this year. I don't think he gets in this year, but I do think he ultimately gets in. So Drew is going to end his career without really any offensive Hall of Famers around him other than maybe Jari. The rest of those quarterbacks that I mentioned, they had Hall of Fame linemen, or they had Hall of Fame receivers, or both. At least on paper, we know, following the New Orleans Saints, how good Lance Moore, Marcus Colston, Jimmy Graham, Pierre Thomas, all those guys were, how great they were. But we also know how underappreciated they were. So, from a national perspective, Drew should have won it. Just because you look at it through the bias through the anti-New Orleans bias eyes of the national media, and it should have been viewed as Drew Brees did all this and he didn't have any talent around him. Okay, I mean that's wrong, but if you're going to look at it that way and still not give him the MVP, I mean, oh my God, you attach the word travesty to it. This team was so much more than Brees that year. But he's the one that ultimately got screwed legacy-wise for it.
I hadn't thought about what you had said. Talk about some greatest quarterback season of all time. You talked about Kurt Warner, greatest show on turf, the original greatest show on turf, because some people start on the 11 set too. But
yeah,
the original greatest show on turf. I mean, you have 2 Hall of Fame receivers and a Hall of Fame running back. You talk about. You said Peyton Manning, some of the years that he had. I think Reggie Wayne's going to get in. Marvin's already there. Dallas Clark probably won't get in, but one of the better tight ends of his eras as well.
Mm-hmm. And even when Peyton was in Denver, he had Demaryius Thomas and Wes Welker and an offense that was designed specifically for him. And again, great quarterbacks, great years. There's no doubting it. But I put Drew Brees at the very top of that because that Saints team still holds the record, the NFL record for most total yards from scrimmage in a season, and it's not even close. And that's in an era. The defenses were the officiating was starting to be a lot easier for offenses, but nowhere near what it is now. Plus an extra game. And the Dallas Cowboys, I believe, are second with their offensive yardage last year, and they're still, I don't believe they're within 300 or 400 yards of what the Saints put up. So even with an extra game, the Dallas Cowboys couldn't match.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And just to finish the point, Tom Brady had Hall of Famers on his team. Gronk's going to be a Hall of Famer. That's an easy one to point out right out the gate. And you talk about Mahomes, Kelsey's going to be a Hall of Famer, and Tyreek Hill will certainly be in that conversation if he continues where he's at this year in Miami. I do want to talk about stats before we go because it's a joke. You want to talk about completion percentage. Aaron Rodgers, 68. Drew Brees, 71. Passing yards, 4,643. Drew Brees, 5,476. Touchdowns, Aaron Rodgers, 45. Drew Brees, 46. Interceptions, Aaron Rodgers, 6. It's pretty remarkable. Drew Brees, 14. I mean, I can keep going, but you want to talk about a lot of those numbers that matter a lot. Drew hasn't beat every single one but interceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Even Aaron Rodgers, at that point, Aaron Rodgers has Jordy Nelson. He has – does he still have Don Driver at that point?
I think so.
Who borderline Hall of Fame type of guy. And for Drew, he doesn't get a Pro Bowl receiver. And to me, that's not just for 2011, but Drew Brees' career as a whole that they're appreciating, is up until Michael Thomas, he had never had a Pro Bowl wide receiver, and that's San Diego and New Orleans.
Yep. Well, and again, you can compare all those stats between Rodgers and Brees that season. We really shouldn't need to go any further than, and I apologize for my piss poor math skills from what I said before, and breaking Marino's record. That's a 25-year NFL record that he broke. End of conversation. Here's the MVP, Mr. Brees.
And I know, like you said earlier, playoff games don't get included, in those type of conversations. Right. But Drew Brees' playoff games against the Lions, in blowout fashion, Drew completed almost 77% of passes for 466 yards and 3 touchdowns. And in the loss to San Francisco, Drew completed 64% of his passes for 462 for 4 touchdowns. He did throw 2 picks, but of course the big touchdown to Jimmy Graham that should have iced the game.
Yeah.
How about this? You want to talk about John Butler doing his homework. John Butler, 2011 Packers Pro Bowlers. I forgot Greg Jennings, John Kuhn, who was a Saint as well, Clay Matthews, Mike McCarthy, BJ Raji, State Farm commercials. Man, I didn't realize it was all. I mean, they had more Pro Bowlers than the Saints did. It's crazy. Anna says the same without superstars. That was the first year of Jimmy Graham, and we can debate that for a different time. Obviously, if Drew had Jimmy in some of those years, 15, 16, even where Jimmy Graham was in his like 17, 18, no doubt Hall of Famer. A lot more fun because he would have been, him and Gronk would have been neck and neck for like every tight end record ever.
Yeah.
I still think Jimmy gets in. I know the stats for the last bit of his career were ugly. I still think he gets in.
He tailed way off, and you know what? I met Jimmy Graham. He goofed around with my daughter in 2014 training camp, so obviously that earns a place in my heart. And I'm rooting for him to get in. I think it's a stretch. And again, I think if Jimmy would have put up the numbers he did in New Orleans with another team, it's looked at differently. I'm convinced that there's an anti-Saints bias through the league. We're gonna start to see some. Is Pat Swilling in the Hall of Fame, Brendan?
No.
Right.
Yes.
How long did it take Sam Mills to get in the Hall of Fame?
I was about to say that. You read my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I don't curse a whole lot on this show. Too damn long.
Mm-hmm.
Fun fact, Sam Mills, I wore 51 my first year of football because of a guy I never got to see play. That's how much I watched VHS. I was the best, but Sam Mills, yeah. Well, let's wrap it up for the show. Definitely want to talk about some happier Saints times. 2011 is something that Bob and I could go on for hours and hours. And I look back to, you know what, we'll end like this. You remember exactly where you were, what you were doing when Drew broke the passing record day after Christmas of 2011.
Yeah, I was hanging out at a friend. Well, my wife knows that I have been that I've seen occasional other girls in my past.
Stop.
So I was hanging out at a friend Rachel's house because I had wrecked my boss's car on Christmas Eve. Yeah, so I was she was giving me a ride to drop the car back off to her. So yeah, that where I ended up watching it over at her house.
I had just gotten back from the airport with my family, picking up my Nana, who was flown in for Chris the day after Christmas. And we're listening to the game on the radio and was really hoping we could get back in time to see it. And we did, barely. But yeah, that was a cool moment. I'll never forget that one. That was a really cool moment. Well, guys, that's all the time we have for this week of the Bayou Blitz podcast. We thank so much for hanging out with us week in and week out. The fact that so many of you come back to hear me talk about sports still boggles my mind. So I'm really appreciative of every single one of you. Bob Rose, where can I follow you on the World Wide Web and maybe get you some replacement Saints helmets? We'll have to find out next week.
First, I'd like to echo Brenda's comments. Thank all of you, and I know it's been a rough season. If you're a New Orleans Saints fan, the Monday night's loss almost felt like a merciful end. Because now, and I've used the word merciful. I hate the fact that it was Tom Brady that put us out of our playoff misery. But whatever. There will be better days ahead. And I promise you, the two of us will have fun shows for you through the rest of the regular season and definitely through the off season. It's going to be a trying off season too, ladies and gentlemen. I'll give you a little bit of heads up, but we're going to have fun with it while still trying to be informative, and give you our honest analysis of every situation and every move that goes down. And we love you for sticking with us through thick and thin. You guys truly feel like family. Let's extend our family. Y'all have done such a great job of promoting our show. Please keep doing it through the holidays into the new year, because y'all, we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here for you as much as you've been here for us, and then some. So to help us out, give us a follow, promote your show, make it a powerhouse. And you can follow me on Facebook, Bob Rose. I'm over on Twitter at BobbyR2613. As you know, all of our works can be followed through the Saints News Network at Saints News on Twitter. And you can follow your show through the Bayou Blitz Facebook page or Bayou Blitz Twitter page at Bayou Blitz Pod. And remember, if you're trying to promote your show and let people know about it, people can go back on YouTube or even through the Bayou Blitz group. You have to scroll a little bit through the group, but you can look at and listen to past shows. So if you're trying to get people turned on to your show and what you love, give them a replay. Play some of those past episodes for us.
Absolutely. We also post all of them through the Saints News Network. So if you just go to si.com/NFL/Saints or Saints.media, you can scroll through the articles, and there should be an article that you can click on, and it gives you a direct link to our YouTube as well. For me, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at BT Boylan. Just to echo what Bob said, I mean, it's been a rough year, and we would be lying to you if we said it was easy to put out content every day, because trying to find a podcast, or if we're giving our honest opinions and it's like negative, it gets old.
Yeah, Kyle won't let me use the F word in articles.
Who would have thought?
I know.
But we really appreciate you guys just hanging out with us, continuing to follow us, support what we're doing, whether it's related, whether it's other things related. It's been a blast to be able to hang out with you guys every week. It's something we definitely both look forward to because you guys are an extension of family. Speaking of family, I wanted to give a quick happy birthday to girlfriend Katie. I'm glad we got to hang out yesterday and celebrate your birthday before I continued my world tour. But happy birthday! I love you. Thanks for another great year of celebrating your birthday. And Bob, I definitely wanted to bring it up because the holidays are coming for so many people. I owe people a T-shirt still. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna run a giveaway on Twitter, and for you guys that are not on social media, because you guys have said that in the chat that you guys don't do social media, I'm gonna run a separate one where you guys can just shoot us an email. We'll have all that information for next week's podcast. Bob's gonna hear the following. It's gonna make him really happy, all coming out of Brendan's pocket because I was wrong on a live broadcast. So we're gonna run two separate ones for you guys. Obviously, we're not gonna double dip and give one of you two gifts. We're definitely gonna spread love as a sign of appreciation. You guys, I owe one of you guys a T-shirt, and Bob and I are definitely gonna get at and talk what we're gonna be giving out as the second gift as a thank you for you guys and the holidays. So until next week, obviously we don't have shows on Sunday, so please go enjoy your stress-free Sunday unless you're just a crazy fantasy player and it's all riding on the last week of the regular season. Then please enjoy your stressful week of football. Bob, did you clinch a playoff spot?
No, I need to win, and I'm in. I'm the New Orleans Saints of our fantasy league. I don't think I've strung together 2 wins all year. I've scored the second most points in my league, but I'm sitting at 6 and 7, and currently tied for 5th place when 6 teams go to the playoffs. So, like I said, I've scored a bunch, but to give you an idea of the Rose bad luck, only one team has given up more points than I have against this year. So we'll see. I might have another rage episode coming.
Oh man, well, shoot me a text if you need the advice. This is my favorite comment of the year so far from John Butler. Bob's giveaway broke memorabilia. That's our giveaway. Some shattered memorabilia from Bob Rose's personal collection.
It's called Game Used.
Bob Rose Game Used autographed Saints helmet. That's what we'll give away. Guys, we really appreciate everything you do. We will see you guys next week for another episode of the Bayou Blitz. Until then, check us out with Saints News Network, saints.media. That's Rose. I'm Brendan Boylan. Remember to find your peace, spread love, practice positivity. See you next week with Bayou Blitz.